Okay, Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dear sisters and brothers, I hope all of you are keeping yourself safe and also sane. Uh, I always repeat this, but please take care of yourselves, in light of the increasing number of COVID-19 cases. Please abide by the SOPs and take the necessary precautions to not only protect ourselves but also those beloved to us, inshallah. So I would also like to inform you that there will be no live lectures and also virtual meetings next week and the week after. So even though the Eid and mid-semester break is from the 12th to the 18th of May, but for the courses that I'm instructing, basically there will be no activities, in terms of live lectures and also virtual meetings for 2 weeks, starting next week and the week after. So inshallah, I will resume with delivering live lectures on Tuesday, the 26th of May, inshallah. Okay. In the live lecture last week, I looked at or I presented on the history of Quranic exegesis. So today, inshallah, we shall cover two subtopics, under the broad umbrella of interpretation and intellectual traditions when it comes to Quranic exegesis. So today, inshallah, I shall look at the modern trends in Quranic exegesis, and also in relation to that, the textualist and contextualist approaches to Quranic exegesis. So these are the two subtopics which I shall cover in the next 30 to 40 minutes or so, inshallah. Okay, let me share with you the slides. Okay, I've mentioned this now. So these are the two subtopics that we shall cover in the next 30 to 40 minutes, inshallah. So we are going to look at the modern trends in Quranic exegesis. By modern, we mean the 19th century onwards, perhaps. If you would like to identify the time, or the period. So that's the period we are looking at, the 19th century onwards. Why? Perhaps because prior to colonization, etc., there was not much developments in the field of tafsir. However, after colonization, whereby there was, I won't say a clash, but perhaps an intersection, between the East and the West, which perhaps posed some problems and challenges, then there was a need, or some scholars saw the need for interpreting the Quran in a different way, to meet the challenges of modernity. So new forms of exegetical, not sure how to pronounce this word, exegetical thinking, such as modernist, scientific, sociopolitical, feminist, thematic, and contextual exegesis have begun to emerge in the modern period. And this was in response to global developments in areas as diverse as politics, the environment, and also ethics. So in response to these global developments, scholars also saw the need for perhaps a new approach when it comes to interpreting Quranic verses. And they also searched for a balance between traditional and modern views of life. Because as we know, in the modern period, the way in which we lived, or human beings lived, differ, or the contexts were different. So that perhaps posed some challenges and required some new interpretation or new approaches when it comes to Quranic exegesis. So this is a photo, if I'm not mistaken, of Muhammad Abdu, who is considered one of the Muslim reformists, uh, and one of the pioneers of modern exegesis, and what characterizes this trend of Quranic exegesis is that it was in response, to the challenges posed by modernity while remaining faithful to the teachings of Islam. So while remaining faithful to the teachings of the religion, uh, they wanted to provide alternatives in facing the challenges of modernity. So central to the modernist approach is the idea of reform. The idea of reform, some would term it as revival. Uh, because the modern context demanded early appraisal of the intellectual heritage of Muslims, whereby these scholars, these modern scholars, questioned or challenged the attitude of most Muslims who would blindly imitate what their forefathers have done or have said or have related to them. So these scholars felt that the doors of ijtihad shouldn't be closed, but it should be opened, because Muslims are facing new challenges due to modernity. And they also argued that there was a need for a flexible interpretation of Islam and its sources in order to develop ideas compatible with modern conditions. And as such, there was a need to understand the Quran from a scientific worldview, meaning from there must be a certain methodology or systematic way in which we approach or understand the Quran. And they also advocated for a return to Islam as it was originally practiced, and as such, they condemned deviations or additions, bid'ah as they call it, which are not considered worthy of the early generations of Muslims. So they wanted to purify the way in which Muslims practiced their religion or viewed their religion, to basically uh, take away or remove elements which can be considered to be deviant and also innovations in religion. They accept the concept of revelation, which did not clash with the use of reason. So in this sense, it was a form of revival of Islam's rationalist philosophical tradition. So there is that re-emphasis on the role of the intellect here. So while they argue that we should return back to how Islam was practiced, during the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the best generations, but there was also a need, to exercise our own reasoning and intellectual capabilities, in understanding Quranic verses and the ways in which how we implement the principles which the Quran advocates in light of the current context or in light of modernity. And there are various arguments which support, so they would bring arguments from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, for example, in which some of the companions actually exhibited how they exercised their intellect and reason in approaching Quranic verses to ensure that they remain relevant and provide solutions to current or modern problems. Another trend in modern Quranic exegesis is scientific exegesis, and this we can find, for example, in the tafsir of Jawhari Tantawi, who is known for this genre of Quranic exegesis, scientific exegesis, where early forms of scientific exegesis in the 20th century attempted to reconcile Quranic teachings with scientific knowledge. So basically, they wanted to ensure that there was a compatibility between scientific findings, scientific theories, or basically scientific knowledge with that which the Quran mentions. Because as we know, the Quran does make certain references to nature, yeah, to what happens in the cosmos, etc. So they wanted to reconcile these verses with scientific knowledge. Today, scientific exegesis has come to be related to the idea that the Quran predicted many of the findings of modern science. Yeah, so then here there is another tendency, yeah, among some scholars to argue that the Quran did predict this, and they use that as one of the proofs of the immutability and authenticity, and that the Quran is indeed from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Why? Because the verses correctly predicted, yeah, uh, some phenomena or some scientific knowledge and facts which could only be discovered in the modern period. However, this approach of Quranic exegesis is criticized. Why? Because they ignore the open-ended nature of scientific discovery, and sometimes they try to impose, yeah, certain scientific discoveries or theories upon Quranic verses, which then perhaps could lead to a misreading of the Quranic verses themselves. And as we know, since science sometimes evolve, and even the theories and hypotheses, they might change. Yeah. So if we have set a certain understanding of a Quranic verse, yeah. So what happens if the scientific knowledge or the scientific fact is being revised? Yeah. So does that then prove that the Quran was mistaken? Yeah. But in fact, what is mistaken is the understanding or the way in which we interpret the verses of the Quran, because we depend, yeah, on scientific knowledge which was available only at that time. Yeah. And this is indeed one of the most popular forms of Quranic exegesis in the modern period, and some perhaps even among Muslims are attracted to such exegesis because to them this proves the authenticity of the Quran. And then we have what is known also as the socio-political exegesis, and one of the scholars famously known for this is Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah, with his Fi Zilal al-Quran, which mostly was authored while he was in prison. Yeah. So the major source of inspiration for those who seek a closer connection between Islam and the state, yeah. So this form of Quranic exegesis, yeah, appeals to those who seek this close connection between Islam and the state, or the Dawlah Islamiyah, or the Khilafah, etc. Yeah. And it suggested that many aspects of modern society, including modern Muslims themselves, were jahili. That is why there is this term jahiliyah of the 20th century, which is attributed to Sayyid Qutb, in which he argues that aspects of jahiliyah, aspects of ignorance, are widespread among Muslim societies. Yeah. And argued that Islam should be the guiding and dominant political force of nations with majority Muslim populations. So the whole idea, or the can we say the motive underlying such form of exegesis is to re-establish that connection between Islam and the state, yeah, and between Islam and politics. Another form of exegesis is thematic exegesis, and one who is famous for this is perhaps Fadl Rahman, yeah, whereby it emphasizes the unity of the Quran and the approaches of interpretation, meaning that we should treat the Quran as a whole and not the verses separately. Yeah. So when we interpret the Quran, we should situate it within the whole context of the Quran itself. Yeah. So it allows an interpreter to identify all verses related to a particular theme and gather them and then study and compare them. Yeah. So the verses related to a particular theme are then brought together and analyzed, yeah, to study the Quranic guidance on that particular issue or theme identified. And this allows, for a more objective approach to the Quran, as argued by the proponents of this form of Quranic exegesis. Then we have also what is as feminist exegesis, where most feminist exegetes criticize traditional male-centered interpretations of the Quran. They argue that most of the scholars who have interpreted the Quran, or most Quranic exegetes, were male, and as such, they had certain biases, associated with males. So they argued that there were gender biases, of predominantly male exegetes, which have largely shaped the understandings of the Quran. And because there are various verses in the Quran regarding women, for example, the verse regarding the qawama, or the some translate that as the superiority of men over women, or of husbands over their wives, because they provide for them. And also when it comes to the issue of inheritance, or the issue of witness, where perhaps some might conclude or might infer from the Quran that two female witness is equivalent to one male witness in terms of inheritance as well. The woman get only half a share of the men. So these might have caused certain issues or problems with a feminist, with Muslim feminists. So they refer to the Quran and Prophet Sunnah to support their claim that the Quran needs to be reinterpreted, and they suggest that the teachings of the Quran actually do not support patriarchy, but rather are highly egalitarian, meaning that be they male or female, they should have equal rights, and they also argue that it is necessary to avoid masculinizing God, or masculinizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are some of the arguments of the feminist exegetes who argue that the Quran needs to be, perhaps, the interpretation of the Quran needs to be looked into, to remove gender biases. And then we have what is known as contextualist exegesis, which we shall then compare with the textualist exegesis in the next subtopic that I shall cover this afternoon. So basically, the contextualist approach, to interpreting the Quran, argue that the teachings of the Quran should be applied in different ways depending on the context. So we have certain guiding principles, or we can derive certain guiding principles from the Quran, which can assist us in implementing, or in manifesting these teachings in practice. So as such, scholars must be aware of both the social, political, and cultural context of revelation, as well as the setting in which interpretation occurs today. So they argue that one should appreciate the context in which the Quran was revealed, in the past, and also the way in which we should apply the teachings of the Quran, taking into consideration the current context or the present context. So here, ijtihad is an important role in contemporary Muslim life, whereby there is a need, to explore new ways of looking at the text, considering the context that we are living in today. And this allows actually for a greater scope to interpret the Quran and question the rulings of earlier scholars, because certain rulings perhaps were made on the basis of their understanding of the Quran due to their context, and as such, perhaps we need to revise, certain rulings, which were derived from Quranic verses, by Quranic exegetes, and also by scholars of Islamic jurisprudence in the past, taking into consideration the current context that we are living in. So basically, they relate the Quran to contemporary concerns and needs by reference to various Quranic ideas and principles that are relevant to the modern period. Okay, now let's move on to textualist and contextualist approaches. So basically, I provided a very brief overview of the contextualist approach, yeah, and the underlying motive behind such an approach to Quranic exegesis. So now let's look at or compare between, compare and contrast between these two approaches of Quranic exegesis. So much of today's Quranic scholarship is based on a textualist methodology, yeah, and it is also largely dominated exegesis in the pre-modern period. So just now we also pointed to the fact that in the modern period, various new approaches of Quranic exegesis started to emerge due to challenges of modernity, which Muslims, whether they liked it or not, they had to face. Yeah. However, during the pre-modern period, the textualist approach was dominant. Yeah. And they relied on a referential theory of meaning to interpret the Quran. So they depended largely on linguistic, yeah, rather than socio or historical analysis, meaning the context, I wouldn't say it was irrelevant, but perhaps it was not given emphasis, yeah, in interpreting the Quran. Rather, the emphasis was on the linguistic, yeah, rather than socio-historical analysis. So they believe that the language of the Quran has concrete, unchanging references, and that the meaning that the Quranic verse had upon its revelation still holds for the contemporary context. Yeah. So here they argue that the Quran, as the Quran was revealed, and the understanding that one has, yeah, of such verses is applicable throughout time. Yeah. Regardless, yeah, of context, regardless of place, regardless of time. And as such, the meaning of the Quran is construed or assumed to be static, yeah. And as such, Muslims must adapt, yeah, to the meaning rather than the Quranic verses adapt to the context or situation that the Muslims are facing. And this approach is prominent in much of today's literature on the Quran, and it is generally well understood. The contextualist approach, on the other hand, it is often associated with Islamic reformism, and we have also looked at why there was this need or this impetus to reform, yeah, Islam in the modern period. So in comparison to textualist approaches, it is arguable that contextualists have a more nuanced approach to finding meaning in Quranic text, yeah, and actually the details of how the Quranic exegetes were attributed to this form or to this approach of Quranic exegesis. It depends, yeah, on the scholars themselves, yeah. So perhaps different modern Quranic exegesis would approach, yeah, the Quranic verses in different ways. However, still within that boundary of the general criteria or the general attributes of the contextualist approach to Quranic exegesis. So according to them, the meaning of a particular Quranic verse or hadith is to a large degree indeterminate, yeah. It is not static, it is not definite, yeah, because over time, it is dependent upon the socio-historical, cultural, and linguistic context of the text. So these are some of the arguments of why the Quran or the Quranic verses should not be static, yeah, or its understanding should not be static, yeah. And consider any given word in the light of its context and to arrive at an understanding which is believed to be more relevant to the circumstances of interpretation, yeah. Basically to relevantise or to contextualize, yeah, the Quranic verse so that it can potentially provide solutions or provide guidance, yeah, in the face of or current challenges. In the contextualist perspective, Quran is not considered to be a book of laws. Yeah, it's not about ahkam. Yeah, but one contains ideas, values, and principles that can be applied through changing times and across different places. So here, the main crux of the argument is that the Quran, it is not a book of laws, it's about ahkam, but more importantly, it is about the guiding principle or the ethical, legal benefit or derived from the Quran that can be then applied to various circumstances in which we are living in. And that requires both a broad and narrow context of the Quran to be understood. When we mention broad contextual understanding, this allows a single verse to be compared to the overall intention and context of the Quranic text. So basically situating that single verse in a larger context. The narrow context, on the other hand, must consider what appears directly before and after the verse in question, and also the exact words of the verse itself. So this is also perhaps can be related to nazam, coherence in the Quran, whereby we look at the verse which comes before and the verse which comes after, and try to interpret such verse in relation to in relation to the verse, to the related verses, because as we mentioned when we looked at nazm al-Quran, we look at the coherence in the Quran, there is a link between the verse which precedes and the verse which comes after. And this is also applicable as argued by Amin Aslahi, for example, that there are interrelationships between not only verses but also chapters of the Quran. Hermeneutics also has an important role to play when it comes to the contextualist approach in interpreting the Quran. So basically, hermeneutics is a set of principles which are used in interpretation of text, and can also be defined as the philosophical exploration of the character and necessary conditions for all understanding, whereby it does not attempt to assign a fixed and stable meaning to a text, but it presupposes that the meaning of a text is found in or assigned to it by the people who read it, So the reader actually is the one who formulates the meaning of the text, and as such, the role of the reader is very important in creation of meaning. So here the role of the reader is emphasized, is considered significant, because it is the reader who creates or who formulates meanings when they come across such text. And this is aligned with the reformist and liberal scholarship in contemporary Islamic thought, and they confront the assertions of Muslim textualists who do not assign any significant role to the reader in the identification of meaning. So Fazl Rahman, he is a scholar which I also previously mentioned, when highlighting the thematic or the thematic approach in Quranic exegesis. He argues that in order to understand the Quran, Muslims must move away from reductionist and formulaic approaches which do not recognize the Quran's social, historical, and also linguistic context. So here he emphasizes the importance of the context of revelation, because without being aware of the social and political conditions of the society in which the Quran was revealed, one could not understand its message, because the Quran was indeed revealed during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and there are certain context or certain issues which were prevalent and important at the time, which the Quran addressed, and which the Quran wanted to address and wanted to change perhaps conditions or of society at that time. So we have to appreciate that context in order to really understand the meaning of the Quran. And here he argues the implementation of the Quran be carried out literally in the context of today, because this may result in thwarting the very purposes of the Quran. That although the fine fuqaha, julius, or the ulama, scholars of Islam during the past centuries or so should be seriously studied and given due weight, it may well be found that in many cases their findings were either mistaken or sufficed for the needs of the society, that society, but not for today. Yeah. So here, Fadl Rahman argues that perhaps the interpretation of 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 a meaning, yeah, of the Quranic verses which were put forward by scholars of the past needs to be revised, needs to be looked at, yeah, because perhaps in the current context it might not be suitable. It could have been suitable for the context in the past, but perhaps for the current context that we are living in, it requires, yeah, a new approach in understanding the Quran or certain Quranic verses. So that is basically, brothers and sisters, the modern approach, yeah, or the modern trends in Quranic exegesis, and also a comparison between textualist, which is often associated with classical form of Quranic exegesis, and also the contextualist approach to Quranic exegesis, which is often attributed or associated with our modern time, yeah, with our modern time. So I hope, inshallah, that what I have delivered is quite clear to you, and I hope that that you will go through the slides, yeah, so that perhaps will provide you with a better understanding, inshallah. And if you have any issues that you want to highlight or discuss, please do not hesitate to do so. We will be meeting, inshallah, virtually on Thursday afternoon, where we can discuss and deliberate, yeah, any issues or any concerns that you might have in relation to the topic which I have covered in this live lecture. I think I shall stop here, brothers and sisters. Please take care of yourselves. Please stay safe. Please stay sane. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.